engine runs, smoke system install, lots of wiring still left to do, cockpit and canopy, battery management, all of the programming still left to do on the Skymaster 1/5 scale F-16. Thanks guys for tuning in. We're jumping right into the action here and continuing with the progress on the Skymaster F-16. So let's dive back in. All right, so we got all of our lighting system set up here. Now, the Skymaster light system, it's a little bit tricky and I'll show you why. The lighting system comes with these are basically splitters is all they are. They don't serve any other purpose. All they do is split the signal. So if you don't want to use these, there's a very simple solution. Just pair up your wires. So for example, these two lights right down here, I just put them on one connector, that plugs in. Our twin lights that light up the vertical stab on the back of the aircraft, those are twinned up and they just plug into one output. So it's very simple to do your lighting system up and not use these things. If you're going to use them, take a pair of scissors or a X-Acto knife, cut the shrink tube off one of them, and you'll see the path of the wires and how everything works. It's very simple, but I try not to use them when possible. Okay, so we're getting ready to power up our system for the first time. But what I've done is I've gone ahead and let all the air out of the air system. So last night before we shut things down, I filled up the air system using our fill valve here, filled it up to 100 PSI, and basically let the aircraft sit. Now with this valve that we're using on the gear and the brakes, the high flow valve from Jetronics / JetCat, the air was powered in the gear down position all night and still at 100 PSI in it overnight, which is perfect. So it sat for about 12 hours full of air. So I let all the air out using just the manual buttons here on the canopy and the lock. Now the reason I let all the air out is because I don't want the gear to be trying to come up and the doors are closing out of sequence, and we need to do our programming on our Zykoy sequencer first for the gear. So I've unplugged this from the system. So now I can plug a data terminal into this and I can do our programming on the Zykoy sequencer. Okay, so we're going to go into a little bit of Jetty advanced programming here. If you're not a Jetty user, well, embrace it because it's a great way to do things. So what we want to do is we want to set up a system here for our door locks. Now we've got the HV69 servos which are locking each of our doors when the door is closed. So first thing we're going to do is go into advanced properties, logic switches. Now I've already created this. We're going to delete that. So it's called door lock. And we have two controls set up here. So the first one is our gear switch. So when the gear is up, this logic switch is enabled. Okay. Next thing we're going to add, we can't really do this yet because we don't have our stuff set up for our telemetry. So what we need in order to add a telemetry control is we need to have the telemetry from our Zykoy sequencer going into the Jetty system. So we will run that over and we'll have the telemetry from the Zykoy system, which is how this is all going to work. But we won't add that in now, we can add it in later, but when we go to add it, we just add it here, and basically it's a telemetry function. And then what we do is we want a hard adjustment here. So if you do the slow angle like this, the servo will slowly move over 12 seconds. We don't want that, we want a hard. It's going to wait 12 seconds and then boom, the servo arm is going to close. So now when we cycle this, after 12 seconds, the servo is going to do its thing. So we'll just wait for this check mark. There you go. So 12 seconds later, boom, that's done. So that is now set up as a logical switch. Now, how do we get this logical switch to work with our gear doors? Well, what we do is now we go back into the model, we go into function assignment. So this is all the functions that we have set up for the aircraft, and we need to go to door lock right here. So we go into door lock, we clear this, and we're going to add a logical switch to control the door lock. So here's our logical switch there. And Now the logical switch is controlling the door lock. So that is how we set that up. Now we're also going to set up another scenario where if the air pressure gets below, let's say 80 psi, those door locks automatically open, and then maybe we would put our fail safe on the Zykoy sequencer to drop the gear at about 60 psi. What I do for that is I see how the gear reacts at lower pressures. So once we get the gear all set up, I'm going to cycle the gear, and if it still works at 50 psi, then we'll probably put our fail-safe at like 60 psi or something like that. All right, so just going through the programming here on the gear sequencer and everything. Now there's some important things that I check when I do a setup like this. Because sometimes what happens when you get into these valves and the Zykoy sequencer and all the different electronic components, sometimes things don't work properly. So as a small example, previous to this clip, when I was, everything was working fine on the gear, but then when I put the switch plug in the central box, turned the system off, and turned it back on, the gear solenoid would default to the up position, and then about 2 seconds later go down, which is an absolute nightmare. So obviously your plane would be sitting on the ground, you turn your plane off, you turn it back on, gear comes up, gear goes down, bottom of the plane's destroyed. So I'll show you guys here what I'm talking about. So now, if I turn that guy off, so our power's off, our gear is down, pull the switch plug, and everything stays hunky-dory. So now we can do a cycle here just to check and confirm everything works. I know it does. So gear goes up, and doors close. Now we've got a restrictor on the down side of the doors. So the doors close fairly forcibly on the up, and on the down they're a little bit slower, you'll see here. There we go. And then gear's gonna come down. Perfect. So those are just some of those small little details to check that really is quite important with your plane. Okay, so now what I'm doing is just going through everything and setting stuff up. So we just got the Cortex set up. It's a fairly easy process if you've done it a bunch of times, but best thing to do with the Cortex is just download the manual from the internet, the big manual from the website, and it explains everything to you. So we've got our primary receiver plugged in here. There's our primary there. We've got our line going to our central box, and we've got our secondary power supply coming to the Cortex. And if we flick our gyro switch, you'll see gyro's on, we got amber, gyro's off, we got red. All right, we've also been getting all of our telemetry set up here as well. So we've got our sequencer telemetry plugged into the system. We've got our V-Speak pressure there as well, and that stuff is working good. Air brakes. Cool, cool. Surfaces. That's awesome. So with the telemetry set up now, the compressor's also plugged in. We've got our battery circuit for our lights all set up. So using our master switch here for the lights, if we use our master switch, you can see on the gear, all the lights turn off. So what happens there is that master switch powers our SPO6 setup, and that turns all the power off. So if you want the lights off, that's a switch that's set up on the system. Lights are on, and then if we cycle the gear here, the lights do turn off when the door closes. All right, there we go. So compressor is set in bar, but it's designed to turn off at 100 PSI, and then it turns on at, I think, about 80 something. But let's see here. So we're ready to take this plane off. We get the engine fired up. We go to take off. What's going to happen is we do our gear up. So gear up, doors are going to close. So we used 12, 13 PSI on that system. So if we don't do anything else during the flight, the compressor is going to stay off. But if we use our air brakes or anything like that, then the compressor will turn back on. And as soon as we do our gear down, the compressor is going to turn on. But let's operate our air brake here. There we go. That is a wonderful addition to any air-powered aircraft like this. So now what I'll do in this portion of the assembly is just go through and do things step by step. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to use our R3 and we're going to add this as our remote on-off switch for this aircraft. So pretty straightforward with Jetty. We're just going to go menu, advanced properties, wireless mode trainer. Sorry, that's the wrong spot. Model, device explorer, RC switch. So nothing's powered up on the aircraft right now. EXT port, like that. Go into RC switch. It's enabled. The SF switch is the one. So actually we'll keep it on the SF switch because that's the owner's switch, even though it's not locked on mine, but that's totally fine. And then we will pair our RC switch. We will plug in our item here.
Receiver off.
There we go. So RC switch is paired. So now what we can do is we can plug this into the switch port on the central box using our control output, and then this can get installed in the aircraft. All right, so just temporarily we've put this in place, plugged it in. What I'm doing is I'm just getting everything working, and then we'll route all of our lines and get all of our positions set. So airplane's off, remote on-off is plugged in, batteries hooked up to the central box, and turn model on. Yes, there we go. So that's good. We'll see our Cortex do its thing, double bump, and perfect. Awesome. So now we'll turn our airplane back off.
Receiver off.
Boom.
Warning.
All right, so we got all of our receivers mounted here. So our clone receiver is mounted on the right-hand side of the fuselage. We've got our primary receiver right down there, nice short little lead into the Cortex. And then on the other side of the fuselage, we've got our R3, which is our on-off, and then we've got our 900, our X3 900, which goes into our R3 port on the central box. So primary antennas, we're gonna have one sideways here, one forward and backwards. The clone, we're gonna have one come across here, and then another one's coming straight back. The 900s will just mount in this area on this side. So that should work good. That's all the receivers mounted, which is nice. We do still have to run a couple lines and things in between everything. But the way we operate things basically is we always use a clone. In our primary receiver, we've got E1, which goes into our Cortex. Cortex goes into central box. E2 ends up being a input. Clone, E1 and E2, both are outputs. One of those outputs comes to the input on the Rec 7, the primary. The other output will come to the R2 port on the central box. So the reason we do that is if the Cortex was to fail, everything still has signal going to the central box. If the primary receiver fails, you still have a line coming to the central box. Then of course you got our 900 built in there as well. So that is our receiver system on the aircraft. That is wicked. I think the next thing we're going to do is get our antennas all mounted, and then I believe we are getting close to being ready to think about working on the canopy. Oh, I still have to do my power leads from the central box coming forward as well too, and then we've got to figure out our nose cone, of course. Time to start thinking about our front cone here. So I ripped the top piece off where our power box screen is supposed to mount. And we've got a great location here now to mount our batteries. We're going to get rid of some of that residue from the high sol, putting this all together. But basically we've got nice 4 slots here for our batteries. So essentially our battery layout on this aircraft is very simple. We've got 3 cell 3300 or 4000, whatever size we need, but 3 of these batteries. and then a 4-cell for the turbine. The Sweewind turbine operates on a 4-cell or a 3-cell. It does operate better on a 4-cell battery, and the 4-cell for 3800 one here fits nicely in this little pocket. So we do have some stuff to figure out where we're going to put our plugs and everything, but that is what we're doing with our cone. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this to the bandsaw, and I'm just going to cut this off. I was kind of examining this over the past couple days, and really I don't think there is a whole bunch of structure built into this. The bottom piece here, this piece does go all the way through, I think. Pretty sure it does. But anyways, we'll still have a little bit of the backside right there, because we're just going to come straight across like that. So I'm going to chop that off and do a little bit of sanding here on the holder. All right, so while we've got the beautiful camo bird on her own legs, we are filling up the fuel tanks to check fuel capacity. So we are using our custom fueling system from RC Custom 3D Printing. Thank you, Joe. Love this thing. So far, we've put in 5.6, 5.7 milliliters or liters into the system. This tells us exactly how much we've put in, how much we take out, and it's awesome. So we're just checking fuel capacity. Main tank was 2.5 liters, and saddles are gigantic. So far we've put 3.5 liters in the saddles, and they are about halfway now. So we're getting there. All right, so we filled up our tanks. We sucked the tanks back out. The usable capacity basically is about 7.75 liters. We actually put a little bit more in there, but I actually didn't realize I was filling up my overflow tank. Anyways, we got about 8 liters of capacity in those tanks. Now what that equates to, because we're using the MUI 30 with this Sweewind setup, the calculation here with the MUI 30, 1 liters use 36 milliamps of battery power. 500 milliliters uses 18, so the full 8.5 liters, it should be 306 milliamps, and the actual usable capacity, about 7.75, should be 279 milliamps. So what we can do to confirm this is we can fill up the front tank of the aircraft, which you know is exactly 2.5 liters. We can run the engine, see how many milliamps it actually uses to completely use that first tank, and that will give us, with an installed scenario, installed resistance, installed fuel lines and everything, our actual numbers. And we can confirm that number against our numbers we found on the test stand. So that is the value in all of this stuff. And again, thank you, Joe. Wonderful tool to have in the shop. Did up our extensions here for our central box. So when I did these guys, I just put the wires sideways on the MPX connectors and then use hot glue to cover up the poles. That allows us to have nice wire path here to the front of the aircraft. Put down some keepers to hold all of our power lines, and those power lines are all getting bundled together on the keepers. So they all come out of the front of the aircraft now, and now we're going to start working on our nose cone setup. So it's time to sand off some of our glue here and figure out where we are putting our connectors. All right, so working on our battery layout here. Now we've pretty much committed to, well, we have committed to having all of our batteries in the nose cone here. I've bolted the nose cone on, the structure. There's no Loctite in these guys yet, so I'll end up Loctiting them. Now we're pretty solid here. There is some flex in the plate. So the flex is kind of in this area. So I think if we put 2 more wood screws in right here, that is going to take care of a lot of the flex, because the flex is on the plate right there. We're using locking connectors at the owner's request, which are these guys right here. So this is what we're going to be installing on that structure in the nose. And we can basically put them, like if we put it right here on the side, we can have this battery just plug in just like that. Same thing on the other side. And then down below, we're going to have our lower batteries. So this side is also going to be a 3-cell LiPo, which is the same thing. We can have that plug in right there. Now the only different battery is going to be a 4-cell LiPo on this side, so we'll make sure we mark that one out. It's marked, maybe it's colored different, whatever it is, but same thing, it's going to come down on the bottom and plug in underneath. So pretty simple structure here and should work well, I think. Now this plane, from my reading, is easy to get nose heavy. Now the manufacturer's, Skymaster's manual says 250 to 280 is the CG range, but from my reading, people are starting off at 280, 275, kind of in that range, and being much happier with it. What I've heard is that when the tanks are full, because they're in front of the CG, the CG ends up being 250 at takeoff, but will be closer to 280 on landing, if that's where you set it up. So we're going to shoot for probably about 280. Now the owner has one of these planes, so we do have the option of doing things the way we do with our Carf Rebel Classics. So his plane, same Skymaster kit, he can just weigh the weight on the nose wheel in a certain configuration. So either with no wings on, whatever his configuration is, and we just match that nose wheel weight on this aircraft. Okay, so we got all of our battery ends done up here, and I was thinking initially about just gluing these guys on, but I want to make them removable. So what I did was I took some pieces of our ABS mounted onto wood, and we're going to glue these into the locations where the clips are going to mount to. So we're going to glue them essentially right in an area like this, and then our battery connector obviously just mounts right onto it with some screws. We'll just use some very short screws, and that I think is a good solution. Better solution, because if we need to replace these clips for any reason, it's going to facilitate replacing them rather than having to like grind them off and everything. So that's a good little change. So we'll get these things glued. All right, we are getting ready to fire up the Swewin 400 engine. This is going to be sick. Now obviously we have run this engine before outside of the plane, so I don't expect any surprises. So a little bit about the specifics. We have primed the engine right to the engine, so it should start the first time. We've got our GSU plugged in. This is our prime plug or power plug, arming plug. There we go. With that plugged in, engine powers up, and you can see there the engine is on. Airplane is not powered up. As mentioned, that's a completely separate circuit on this engine. Now we have put 2.5 liters of fuel in the main tank. So we're gonna run this engine until it runs out of fuel. And we've got our jetty box plugged in here to our MUI 30, and that's got its own separate power. So we're gonna see how many milliamps it takes to go through 2.5 liters of fuel. That's ultimately the purpose of this test. So let's power this plane up and see. First startup, preheat. Numbers are looking good. Lots of air bubbles. So I'm not going to turn the camera off. I'm going to give you my first reaction. You can hear the thing is cooling down. That is unbelievable how much power it has. I could only go to full throttle for a couple seconds, and then the whole plane starts pushing me back. So when you guys saw me getting pushed back, I was at 3/4 throttle. I wasn't even at full. I could only go to full and blip it at full, and that's it. It is so much power. Coco, you're gonna love this engine. And I did have it set to 70 for acceleration. That's the max. And it's way too fast. Like, you could get it accelerating in 2 seconds. The engine, the compressor's stalling. So I put the acceleration to 65. And it's accelerating from a true idle to max RPM in 3.8 seconds. This is going to be a ridiculous combination. Holy man. All right, so more importantly was the whole purpose of that test. So that was using our full tank, so 2.5 liters in 73 milliamps through our MUI 30. So all of our battery connectors are fastened in place, and our battery hold down system is done. So we always use the fuzzy side of Velcro on batteries. So when we slip our batteries in here, these guys go over top. We've got our scratchy side and our scratchy side. These two batteries are going to have Velcro on the underside, so they're going to stick on the front end. And we've got this strap that goes across those batteries, and that strap is held down with another layer of this material, obviously all screwed together. So nice, solid, strong battery system. So we're going to put our keepers on now. We've got everything wired in, so we've got our leads here going to our secondary clone receiver, and we've got our Jetty G10 keepers. These go on each side of the central box, and this one goes on the receiver side or accessory port side, and we just screw those down with the included hardware. So we'll get those guys installed, and then we can clean up our wiring a little bit. All right, so we're just mounting antennas, getting our lines run to our canopy. So this open close is now done, and I'm just working on the actual canopy right now. So the canopy's a little bit tricky because you don't have access to the air cylinder here. So what I did was I unscrewed the air cylinder. It was kind of glued in place, so I had to give it a bit of a pop out with a trusty bent screwdriver. and we can get this reinstalled. It goes back in this area right there, so it's not too bad. The airlines need to feed through the larger hole right there, and then they go into the fuselage right in this area. So before I put the airlines on the air cylinder, I take a little bit of silicone oil, put a couple drops in each side of the cylinder. That helps seal everything up and lubricate everything, and the cylinder moves a lot smoother now. So we're going to get these both set up like this and reinstalled on the canopy. So we got our canopy installed. It's pretty easy because you have your 2 pins on the back here, and I just wanted to get that in and see how it fits with the airlines and everything. So we're happy with that. We do have to get this canopy installed before we install our cockpit, because you need access from this side for the retaining pins, and obviously you can't get at them if you have the cockpit in place. So that's another reason that it's good that we've got our cockpit separate from our pilot. Our pilot's mounted on the seat. We just use shoe goop and some CA to get him mounted. Because this is a little bit bigger pilot, we had to kind of scoot him down a little bit, pulled his shoes off so he fits in there, but that should work out good. And I think last thing we're going to do tonight is get our rear canopy mounted. Now, when I was looking at scale pictures here, initially I thought, okay, maybe I'm going to paint all of this area black, but when you look at scale pictures of this aircraft, this is all colored in like that. So this is all brown, it's all uniform brown throughout this whole back section. So we're not painting that black, we're going to leave it the way it is. And I think what I'm going to do to mount this is use some shoe goop. This is how I would generally mount things like this. We have a really good fit here. You can actually get this tucked in really tight on top like that, and the canopy opens up beautifully. So that won't be a problem at all. Nice fit on this unit, and with the shoe goop there, it's not going to go anywhere. And if you ever want to take this off, you would be able to peel it off, like put some safety wire underneath and peel it all the way around. But this piece can always stay in place, and if you need to take the canopy off, you just reach in and pop it loose from the back side, the retaining pins. So once this gets installed, it can live there on the aircraft, so it can be permanent. Okay, so we've got our rear canopy glued in place. We're just letting that cure overnight. And last thing I'm doing here is getting our smoke sticks set up. So this is what the final result is. Basically, we make a pair of aircraft ply plates with a groove in them. We sand the actual smoke nozzle where we're going to mount our plates, which is right there. Install some Hysol and get those things clamped. So what you're looking for is essentially, need a solid background here, essentially that smoke stick should be kind of parallel with the mounting, because that's the center line of the turbine. So that's what we're after right there. All right, so we got our smoke nozzles all finished here. Just put a piece of silver Festo tubing on there. This is a 4mm size, and a double wrap of our safety wire. So these are nice and solid. I drilled the holes through the wood first, and then we put an extension bit on here. So these are a little bit oversized. They're 1/8 size, and these are 1/16 size. So that'll be drilling through our carbon and our engine rails. So we'll get these guys installed. All right, so we've got the canopy pretty well sequenced, and let's activate it here. So we're locked and closed, canopy open, so it's unlocked and opened, and canopy closed and lock. So we've got a restrictor on both sides of our canopy open and close valve. So that is about as slow as it's going to get, but looks good. Functions really well too. That's kind of the most important thing. All right, so additionally, we got our smoke system all installed here. So we got everything mounted, put some BVM ceramic paint over top of our wood pieces that hold our nozzles. And we've got that routed to the T, and of course back to the on-off valve for the smoke system. So we got our pilot figure all installed, we got our cockpit installed, and everything works out good there. We got a couple things we need to deal with here. So the cockpit tub here sits right in this area, and then when the canopy tries to close, I don't know if that'll show through the reflection, I think so, right past my finger there, the canopy sits over top of the cockpit tub, so we do have to cut our tub off just a little bit of an angle here, because otherwise what happens is when this closes or tries to close, you can see that we have some resistance at the base here. So we're just going to snip that off. Before we put the pilot guy in, everything was working really well. So that's one of the little changes we need to make. In our back end here, we got our built by label installed. So we actually installed that onto a little 3D printed angle piece that we used in the previous F-16. And we just used some goop to mount all those items on, and that looks great. All right, and it is CG time with the massive F-16. Now, the range that is provided in the manual is 250 to 280 millimeters back from the leading edge. So if you're not familiar what that means, this joint right here, we're going 280 millimeters back. Now there is one of the rods or wing spars that come through here. So 280 is just behind the front of that, that rod. Now we're using our CG machine, and that CG machine is from rcjets.com. Love this thing. It is such a time saver. And just pop it out of the case here, and super quick to put together, and what it does is it gives us perfect measurements on everything. So using our Zykoy CG machine or our electronic device is really easy. So there we go. Now I'll give you a couple quick shots here of what we got going on. So what I did first was I put the numbers in to be 280 millimeters back, and we were nose heavy without any batteries in the aircraft. So what does that mean? Well, it means that to get to 280 and to put batteries in the nose, we're going to have to add a couple pounds of weight to the back of the aircraft, which kind of sucks, but there's really no way around it because there's nowhere to put any more of the stuff in the back of the aircraft. So right now there's no fuel in the plane, and we are at 250 millimeters from the leading edge and no batteries, and we are tail heavy. And then if we go to select model, we'll edit this, and we'll go to 140 from mains to CG, which brings us to 280 back. We'll save that, select it. So right there, we're half a pound nose heavy with no batteries in the aircraft. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if you look at the CG point, we'll just say the CG point is pretty much on this black line or really close to it. So if you put 2 pounds of batteries in the nose of the aircraft, you're going to have to add 2 pounds or more, actually, because we're a little bit nose heavy right now, to the back of the aircraft in order to balance that out, to keep the CG where we need it to be. Now, the owner does currently own one of these aircraft, so the other thing we're going to do is he's going to measure the nose weight on his current aircraft in a certain format, and we'll match this aircraft to that nose weight, and that's going to give us the CG location roughly, because when your plane is laid out exactly the same, that's what you're looking for. Now, the owner has a current F-16 like this, same size. It's an older generation Skymaster 1/5 scale F-16, and he has added weight to the tail of his aircraft. So totally fine. The aircraft's really never going to notice the difference. You know, if you need to add 3 pounds of weight in the tail to make the CG balance out, that's what you have to do. Some aircraft, you got to add that weight in the nose. All right, and some of our final little details here. We've got a ladder, and this ladder came from Joe at RC Custom 3D Printing. Thank you so much, Joe. Joe actually did up 2 of these for me, and at my request, one for this aircraft. And we also got one done up for the Venom F-16 that we completed previously. So that's a cool little detail. And then the last thing here was marking out our single 4-cell battery. So that is the one that powers the monster. All right, guys, and that wraps up the build or assembly portion of this aircraft. We still have lots to do with the detailing side of things. So we are still going to have one more video. It's going to be a little bit of a tutorial style, and that's going to be the weathering process and the detailing process of this aircraft. So I enjoy that part as well. It's tons of fun. And I'm just gonna give a quick plug for channel membership. Number one, thank you to all you channel members that are currently channel members. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, what the heck is channel membership? Well, our channel members here at the Lighter Side of RC, they get to see the videos early. So generally we are 1 to 2 weeks ahead on our videos, and channel members get access to those videos before the regular viewers get to see them. So if you're interested in channel membership, there's some links down below. Check it out. And again, thank you to our current channel members. We appreciate it. It's a really darn cool aircraft. This is the first big Skymaster F-16 that I've put together, and it was a challenge, a lot of cool things, learned some cool things, and it's definitely a cool aircraft. The gear on this thing is outstanding. Overall, the kit is phenomenal quality. Obviously, lots of little details to deal with, but it was good. 2 thumbs up from me, that's for sure. So hopefully guys will join me on the weathering process. Thanks so much for watching our videos, and if you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button down below, and we'll see you in the next video.